Welcome back to another episode of the Collaborative IEP podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host, and I am a sweaty mess. Summertime. So here on the podcast, we have tried a couple of things for summertime, and the thing that we think you want the most is shorter episodes. So, I look at business metrics, that the data drives the instruction. Even here, that's good business. And what I know you want is shorter episodes in the summer because you listen to them when they're short. Also, the sweaty mess part is I provide most of our childcare for Jack in the summertime, and that starts with a workout in the morning. I am a much better parent and I am a much healthier patient when I work out in the morning. And you know what? You can't do it all. So you're getting me sweaty today. And we've changed up the way that we market the podcast on Instagram. So it's important that I show up on video. And I said to Rachel, listen, we are perfectly imperfect. And if I have to show up sweaty some days, then I show up sweaty. So here we are. I also have that thing. I think this is common in type A people, and you might be type A, where my diaphragm's really tight. And so if I sound like I'm yawning a lot, it's just because occasionally I need to take a deep breath. I don't know. It happens and then it goes away, and it happens and it goes away. And see, it just feels good to take a deep breath. Anyway, maybe if I don't think about it. Oh, I didn't even turn off my watch from my workout. Okay. So today, on today's episode of the Collaborative IEP podcast, we are going to be talking about sections 1417 and 1418 of IDEA. They are deceivingly about 3.5 pages long, but they really aren't that long because after sections, there are a series of notes. And so it's pretty short. And I think we can do it in a short episode. 1417 is called administration, and we really hear about what the Secretary of the Department of Education does. And 1418 is called program information, and it's just got some perfunctory stuff in it. So let's dive into 1417 and let's get started. So 1417 only has A through E. A is called responsibilities of the secretary. B is called prohibition against federal mandate, direction, and control, which is really pertinent right now in today's policy discussions. C is called confidentiality. D is called personnel. And E is called model forms. Each provides us with a little bit of good information that probably satisfies your curiosity and maybe gives you a couple of resources. So first of all, responsibilities of the secretary. This is subsection A of 1417, and what it indicates is that the secretary of the Department of Education has two main responsibilities. And of those two main responsibilities, there is a sub A and a sub B under number one. So number one, the Secretary of the Department of Education at the federal level shall, that means she has to do this, she must do that. And right now that person's name is Linda McMahon, which is why I am saying she. She shall cooperate with and furnish technical assistance to states with matters regarding to the education of children with disabilities and provide and in carrying out the subchapter. So like anything else. So she has to help and she has to provide technical assistance. And then she also has to provide short-term training programs and institutes. Okay. So those are the two main responsibilities that the secretary has to do. Then B, and this is really pertinent within this discussion. Basically in B, this one's called prohibition against federal mandates, directions, and control. Basically in B, it says that the federal Department of Education's secretary can't get in the way of the state's ability to control its own specific instructional content, academic achievement standards and assessments, curriculum, and program of instruction. This is really important because we're seeing these federal mandates that schools do and don't do certain things. For example, we're seeing federal mandates that are coming out of the Trump administration saying that schools cannot have DEI initiatives. I've seen a couple of things indicating that PBIS, positive behavior intervention systems, like the school-wide ones, which are, tend toward an SEL curriculum, are now, kind of subject to these mandates. And so it'll be really interesting as these things kind of trickle through the court system to see how this one specific provision of IDEA is enforced. Now, IDEA, of course, only deals with the education of students with disabilities, but certainly you can anticipate that there are similar provisions out in laws about education, right? So I don't know what those are because that's not necessarily my wheelhouse. If I had to find it, I probably could. Well, I definitely could because girls can do anything. Okay. Then C, that's my favorite motto. Then C, confidentiality. We got to keep all of the data and the people and the information and the records confidential because that's what the government does. Then D, personnel. The Secretary of the Department of Education obviously has the ability to hire people and, to use pay rates that are normal. Okay. And then E, you might not know that these things exist, but the Secretary of the Department of Education has to ensure that there are model forms for the IEP, for an IFSP, which is kind of like an IEP for preschool kids, for procedural safeguards that are for parents, and for prior written notice. So those things exist on the U.S. Department of Education's website, and that is to be a resource for states. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is IDEA Section 1417 in a nutshell. Let's move on to 1418. Section 1418 is called Program Information, and we have subsections A through D. The title of A is in general. The title of B is data reporting. The title of C is technical assistance, and the title of D is disproportionality. So let's look at each one of those provisions, and I'll give you the quick and dirty overview of those. So under A, you probably already know this, but A gives us a list of the data sets, some of the data sets that the secretary has to report or make available. Okay. And so every state that has assistance, that gets federal funding. So right now that's every state. Of course, that's being challenged, but every state that gets federal funding has to provide data on a lot of different things. And then that data has to be published, right? So the first thing is the number and percentage of children with disabilities. So the people that qualify for IDEA. And the data has to be reported by race, ethnicity, limited English proficiency, gender, and disability category. Okay, so those 5 categories we're going to see repeated over and over again. I'm going to repeat them again because I'm not going to repeat them again. But race, ethnicity, limited English proficiency, the status of that, right? Gender and disability category, those 5 things. And it's important that we get data by those 5 things because then we can look at it and see if there's disproportionality with students that have limited English proficiency, or if there's disproportionality by race or by ethnicity or something like that, right? So we have to look at the data critically in order to make sure that we're doing the best thing that we can do. And then the data has to come in each of the following categories: people that are receiving a FAPE, people participating in regular education, people in separate classes, separate schools, or separate facilities. And then number 4 is people that stopped receiving special education and related services, like those dismissed, and also the reasons why they were dismissed. Remember, they have to have an evaluation. Number 5 is people removed to that interim educational setting where you can go for 45 days under certain circumstances. And then 5, subsection 2, is the acts that precipitated those removals. So was it a threat or a dangerous weapon or physical harm or alcohol? What was it? And then 5.3 is the number of kids with disabilities that are subject to suspensions and expulsions. Okay. So that's the first thing that has to be reported. That's a lot, but we see that, and that's how we get that really good data on disproportionality with that. And we've seen a lot of that data anticipate or interpreted as we get good guidance on discipline, restraint and seclusion, etc. Okay. B is we have to know the number and percentage of children with disabilities. Again, divided into those 5 categories. So I'm going to say them one more time: race, gender, ethnicity, actually just those 3, right? Because, well, interesting. I don't think I ever realized that the list doesn't carry through. So what we're missing is limited English proficiency and disability category from here on out. I'm going to make sure that those 2 stay out the entire time. See, I told you I like to do this because I like to learn too. So B is the number of people that are receiving early intervention services. And that has to be divided again by race, gender, and ethnicity. C is the number and percentage of kids, again, just by those 3 who stopped getting early intervention services and the reasons for that. D is the incidence and duration of disciplinary actions, just by those 3. Oh no, interesting. Race, ethnicity, limited English proficiency status, gender, and disability category. Now it's by all 5, including suspensions of 1 or more days, the percentage of people that are removed to the alternative educational settings, or expelled. Then F, the number of due process complaints, and I find that super duper interesting. I have all kinds of ideas as to how those statistics kind of lie, but I love to go into that spreadsheet to see where people are filing due process proceedings. One thing, I'll stop here to just weigh in on one thing. One thing that I think is really interesting, or I don't know, it kind of I project, right? Like Griffin took a class called AP Human Geography, and it's about like where people land kind of based on history or like events of the moment. And this is kind of related to that. So, how it was like interesting to see what people would do after COVID, like what the impact of our COVID lifestyles would be. So I think something that will be interesting to watch is the impact of these Trump administration mandates on the filing of due process. I am less inclined to file due process as an attorney kind of by principle, by practice. I'm collaborative, and that's a discussion for another day. But I fully believe that we need to educate our state departments of education about what's happening in schools right now, because we might need state departments of ed to go to advocate for us at the federal level, right? Like grassroots advocacy can go so far, policy groups can go so far, like together we are better kind of idea. And so if we need our state departments of ed to help, their statistics on due process filings might need to increase in order to incentivize them to do that. So I'm curious to see what happens with those numbers. But I also like the trends, like where there are more advocates, California, East Coast, are there more filings? And the answer colloquially, in my opinion, is yes, although I've never like formally researched that. Okay. So anyway, number of due process hearings and number of complaint. And then G is the number of hearings requested and the number of changes in placement ordered as a result of the hearings. H is the number of mediations held and the number of settlements. And you do have to report that, when you settle, and you always get the paperwork afterwards. And that's the reason why. And then we back all the way back out to number 2, the number of percentages of infants and toddlers by race and ethnicity only who are at risk of having substantial developmental delays, and any other information that the secretary wants. And so sometimes that list gets bigger. Then we get a little bit of information indicating that the secretary has to look critically at the data and provide any technical assistance to states that need it in interpreting the data. And finally, we get the disproportionality provisions indicating that, of course, we have to look at the percentages by those 5 different criteria, or 3 when appropriate. And we have to make changes and make plans if disproportionality occurs. And then, of course, the Federal Department of Education has the authority to help the states if they need to address disproportionality. And of course, the data, we've covered this on the podcast several times, the data regarding disproportionality in discipline, for example. So states have to have plans for that. Okay, that wraps up those 2 sections of idea. Hopefully that is surface level enough. Remember, in these last few provisions, we aren't going as nitty gritty because they they aren't as substantive for us, but I still think they're interesting, and I'm trying to make them applicable, so that you can follow along. I will see you next week, same time, same place. Have a great week.